Hello, my name is Neil Mattox and I'm the Coordinator of Reef Conservation Actions in the Reef Joint Field Management Program. This program is jointly funded by the Queensland and Australian governments to deliver the day-to-day management of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. The two departments in charge of this delivery are the Reef Authority, maybe still more familiar as Keppel, and the Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service. This is a program that puts staff, rangers out in the marine park to undertake tasks such as monitoring of wildlife, public contact and compliance with zoning restrictions, incident response, mooring maintenance and island national park management. The program is also increasingly involved in trials of developing reef rehabilitation tools and training in their use. One of the key objectives being to ensure field staff are familiar with and able to utilise suitable tools and techniques in response to local scale impacts to the reef. For example, vessel or anchor damage or even impacts from cyclones or bleaching to high value areas of a reef. Over the past 5 years, the program has been a leader on or facilitated over 15 different projects focused on trialling reef rehabilitation tools and concepts. Today I'll talk to you about one of our projects in the Southern Great Barrier Reef undertaken in partnership with Mars Sustainable Solutions, part of Mars Incorporated, local tourism operators Keppel Dive and Freedom Fast Cats, and the local traditional owners, the Woppaburra. And to answer the symposium question, why do we do this work? Well, along with the training, connecting, educating and communication opportunities it presented, it was also a first test of whether hard coral fringing reef habitat could be rapidly re-established over rubble that had become macroalgae dominated. As the rest of this presentation will show, while the early signs have been promising, questions remain. Before I move on with more project details, for those not familiar with the Reef Star, the rehabilitation tool used, here is a quick overview. The Reef Star, developed by Mars Incorporated through the Mars Sustainable Solutions team, is a fabricated steel frame covering approximately 0.8 square metres of benthos at the base that is coated in a suitable finish, usually coral limestone sand. Following attachment of up to 15 live healthy coral fragments, these frames can be interlocked on the seafloor to create stable structure for the ongoing growth of corals. These are now being used on many reef rehabilitation projects around the world, and the Mars team continues to work with project partners to enhance and refine their use and design. The field management program plans to hold stockpiles of these at each of its main operational bases for use in a rapid response to local scale impacts, such as vessel or anchor damage. A reef rehabilitation project I'm going to talk about was named Yarralpingiga by the Woppaburra Traditional Owners. It means putting down, connecting rope, which was seen as an appropriate metaphor for a project focused on connecting people through reef rehabilitation efforts. This Southern Great Barrier Reef project was the third the program had engaged in following similar trials using Reef Stars in the northern and central Great Barrier Reef. More information on these projects can be found at the Reef Authority website. Just search on Woppaburra Reef Rehabilitation. There is also a 3-minute video available on this project. In May 2022, project team members met to discuss final site options, shortlisted from earlier site surveys and discussions with stakeholders. Key criteria for the sites included A, they were examples of unstable rubble that had not substantially regained hard coral cover from earlier recorded impacts, and B, they would be accessible, both for the installation and ongoing monitoring and for tourism and education operators to bring visitors to learn more about local reef rehabilitation efforts. This project also represents both the first trials of Mars Reef Stars in the Great Barrier Reef fringing reef and the first trials in areas of unstable rubble completely dominated by macroalgae. With many inshore fringing reefs showing significant increases in algal cover, we wanted to test Reef Stars in that type of environment. A key project concept being that if the coral could grow to cover the Reef Stars, they would eventually shade out and outcompete the underlying macroalgae. The project involved installations at 3 discrete sites: shelving and monkey reefs on Great Keppel Island and Humpy Island Reef, approximately 3.5 kilometres to the southeast. The sites at Great Keppel Island were selected in part for their accessibility to both vessel and shore-based visitors. The monkey reef site is situated within a no-fishing marine national park zone, and the shelving reef site is in a conservation park zone, where limited fishing can occur. Both sites had low levels of macroalgae at and adjacent to the sites. In contrast, Humpy Island site was selected as a trial of Reef Stars in a highly macroalgal-dominated environment. This reef along its northwestern side has large areas of relatively unstable rubble completely dominated by macroalgae, including Woppaburra sargassum and another brown algae genus which became increasingly problematic through the project. This site is also a conservation park zone. Extensive freshwater bleaching in 2011 is considered to have been one of the main impacts to the reef in this area, leading to the habitat changes. In total, 200 Reef Stars were installed at the 3 sites between the 11th and 15th October 2022. Coral fragments used were collected from several nearby locations, including Humpy Island Reef, which continues to support high coral cover. Coral species available were relatively limited and mostly Acropora with some Pocillopora and Montipora species. These healthy fragments are collected as corals of opportunity, that is, they're identified as fragments or even whole colonies that have become dislodged or broken off from some previous disturbance and are unlikely to remain safely in their current position. Project implementation, including coral collection, attachment of corals, and installation and securing of Reef Stars, took place over 5 days and involved approximately 35 people and 4 vessels plus dive tenders. A total of 13 divers were engaged in the collection of coral and the deployment of Reef Stars. The attachment of a total of nearly 3,000 coral fragments to the Reef Stars was undertaken at Shelving Beach and provided an ideal opportunity for further public contact and discussion around reef health issues. The Reef Stars attached corals were then transferred by vessel to the rehabilitation sites. 75 Reef Stars and approximately 1,100 attached coral fragments were placed at each selected site in Shelving and Monkey Reefs. Long-term monitoring transects were installed at a control site established at Monkey Reef. At the Humpy Island site, we installed 50 Reef Stars using approximately 700 live coral fragments within an area of unconsolidated rubble with nearly 100% macroalgae cover. A control site was installed in the reef 10 metres to the south. At the time of installation, October 2022, no macroalgae was removed as there was very little emergent sargassum, and the lower lying Woppaburra was situated underneath the installed Reef Stars. Since installation in October 2022, the Shelving and Monkey Reef sites have been accessed regularly by local tourism operators, Freedom Fast Catch and Keppel Dive. The Konomi Education Centre has also regularly accessed these sites with school groups. Monitoring the 3 sites has been undertaken in January and December 2023, and a further site visit occurred in January 2024 after the commencement of the current widespread bleaching event. Project monitoring and active management will continue until at least 2027. Data collected so far is yet to be fully analysed. However, the following images demonstrate how the project has fared in the 18 months since installation. The first 10 months, all 3 sites showed rapid growth and cementation of the coral fragments onto the Reef Stars. This image shows some of the Reef Stars and corals at the Monkey Reef site 5 weeks after original installation. While turfing algae soon covered the exposed Reef Star structures, this did not appear to impact coral growth, and almost no macroalgae was recorded growing at either of the Monkey or Shelving Reef sites. August 2023, 10 months after installation, most of the Reef Star structures at both sites adjacent to Great Keppel Island were covered by the rapidly growing corals. The Monkey and Shelving Reef sites were regularly visited through 2023 by project partners, and many tourists and school groups have snorkeled over them. Project sites represented first efforts at the use of Reef Stars on the Great Barrier Reef fringing reef. The Humpy Island site was of particular interest. With climate-driven threats to the reef increasing the risks of area of macroalgae-dominated rubble beds, the program is keen to investigate tools that may assist local-scale rehabilitation. This site was selected because of the almost 100% macroalgae cover growing over the rubble. At the time of installation, October 2022, the site was dominated by Woppaburra with some sargassum. No effort was made to remove any of this macroalgae. The image on the left shows some of the site just prior to the installation of Reef Stars, and the not so great image on the right, grabbed from a video, shows this site just after installation. In December 2022, the installed corals were beginning to cement onto the Reef Stars, and the undergrowth of macroalgae did not appear to be having a significant effect on the corals. In January 2023, some macroalgae growth over the corals was evident. The Reef Stars were cleaned using small brushes and most of the macroalgae removed. By August 2023, with no further efforts to physically clean the Reef Stars, the corals seemed largely unaffected by the underlying macroalgae, and growth rates comparable to other project sites at Great Keppel Island were observed. As this image, also taken in August 2023, shows, one of the more problematic macroalgae species was beginning to establish itself on some of the Reef Stars. A brown algae, possibly with a name I can't pronounce, was attaching to some of the structures. This species grew rapidly at the site from around this time, presumably as the water temperature started to warm. By December 2023, when photographic monitoring was undertaken, a deep overstory of macroalgae, up to 50 centimetres over the top of the growing coral, was dominating the site. This algae had grown rapidly over the previous 3 months. Unfortunately, this site is not regularly visited by our tourism industry partners, and we had not scheduled a site visit in that time, as the same time period in 2022 had not resulted in extensive macroalgal growth. A team of marine park divers hand cleared the macroalgae growing over the coral during this trip. Observations at that time indicated some stress from the overgrowth, with signs of bleaching and possibly some mortality. In early February 2024, before a follow-up trip to check on rates of macroalgal regrowth could occur, a Marine Parks Reef Health Impact Survey team recorded extensive bleaching at all 3 sites. Similar rates of bleaching were observed throughout nearby areas of natural fringing reef. Interestingly, the extensive macroalgae growth removed in December had not returned to any noticeable degree. Whether this was because the physical removal was so successful or because of some other environmental factor, for example heat stress, is unclear. Judging by the extent of bleached coral in the images, it is surmised that most survived the previous macroalgal growth, only to be impacted by heat in early 2024, although it is possible that many corals were still in a stressed state from the algae overgrowth in late 2023. While collected data has yet to be fully analysed and the project is ongoing, there are some key observations that can be made now from a resilience-based management perspective. This project, from development through to inception and ongoing management and monitoring, has connected all involved and extended to the visiting public through regular visitation by snorkelers and divers. A traditional ceremony and talk at the start of the project detailed the ongoing connection that the Woppaburra have to Great Keppel or Humpy Island and the surrounding marine environment. There's also an opportunity for some families that have moved away to visit the island for the first time. In terms of governance, the Reef Authority approved this project as a management activity under Section 5.4 of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Zoning Plan and entered into agreements with all main partners. This resulted in a very collaborative and inclusive approach and allowed for a sense of ownership of the site. This network of partners will continue to access the sites, and we intend to engage with them through 2024 as we adaptively manage the project through a significant bleaching event. As I mentioned earlier, a video of this project can be found at the Woppaburra website. Just search on Yarraltingiga. Right now, regardless of any data analysis, it's hard to comment on any ecological outcomes of this project as we continue to monitor the impacts of extensive bleaching across the Great Barrier Reef. What is clear from these photos, though, is that prior to the rapid macroalgae growth at the Humpy Island site and the widespread thermal bleaching still underway, the sites were all growing rapidly. We plan to hold a project team meeting in the coming months to review ongoing management options. This may range from just continued monitoring of the sites as is, through to more rehabilitation works, including the addition of more coral from stocks that survived the bleaching event. Further observations to date from the Humpy Island macroalgae trial include: for the first 12 months, coral appeared to grow well over the extensive macroalgae. While some algae clearing in January 2023 may have been important in this period, it does seem that macroalgae impacts were not extensive through that first summer of 22-23. But later in 2023, some algae species, in particular the unpronounceable filamentous one, may have been establishing itself in the Reef Star structures where there was available space to attach. With no further hand clearing taking place, this rapidly overgrew the site in late 2023. Had we done a complete clean of the site around September, October 2023 and monitored more closely, I believe we could have kept the algae growth under control. This would likely have taken a team of 4 divers, only 1 dive. There may also have been a need for further cleans in the ensuing months depending on rates of algal growth. Had this occurred, and of course at sea temperatures been averaged, I believe the corals at this site would be close to completely covering the Reef Stars and the underlying benthos at this time. It is hoped to continue this trial with some modifications over the next few years. I plan to actively manage and monitor the sites until at least 2027. Later this year, after the outcomes of the current bleaching event are clearer, we will review the project and determine what management actions we will take over the next several years. One outcome of that review should be, I think, more focused management of macroalgal growth at Humpy Island, so we can more clearly determine whether it is possible to use Reef Stars to shift areas of reef from macroalgae dominated back to a hard coral cover. Acknowledging the work of everyone involved in this project, in particular the hard-working and professional QPWS staff that have contributed or led nearly all aspects of this project to date, from dive operations to boat driving to coral collecting to traditional owner engagement. Mars Sustainable Solutions, who have been great partners to the program for 5 years now and who we will continue to work with. Project partners Freedom Fast Cats, Keppel Dive and Konomi Education Centre, who assisted throughout implementation and continue to be involved. And finally, the Woppaburra Traditional Owners for their active involvement in project planning and implementation, and most of all for their generous welcome to country.